Most of them are bad. If we just had a rule that for every new one you passed, you had to repeal 4 old ones, that would be good.
That's how John Stossel responded when I asked him, what's the worst law you've ever covered? Now, I know he's a man who needs no introduction, but I'll have him introduce himself anyway.
I'm John Stossel. I run Stossel TV, which reaches more people than I used to reach at Fox. My most relevant book is my first one, Give Me a Break, which talks about how I went from not quite socialist, but a big government promoter to I finally woke up to the benefits of liberty.
We at Learn Liberty were thrilled to have the opportunity to talk with one of the lions of the liberty movement, a man who throughout his career has won hearts and minds for the cause of liberty by telling good stories in an honest and compelling way. So, John, tell us more about that transition. What brought it on?
Being a reporter and covering things and seeing how what I was taught in college was bullshit. At Princeton, they told me, look, it's terrible that we have this rich country and people are still poor, and we can solve these problems and have programs for poor people. And then when I started in television, I just accidentally fell into a local TV newsroom job in Portland, Oregon. I had never written a story for the school newspaper. I was never a good writer. I just learned through fear. And I was writing for the anchors, and because I'm a stutterer, though obviously I've largely gotten it under control, I didn't want to be on the beat with the other political reporters blocking as I shouted out questions. So I was trying to cover things that other people didn't cover, and I became a consumer reporter. They didn't exist at the time, but I thought what people bought and medicine and science deserved to be covered on TV also. So I did that, and we would cover scams, and we would send a car to a bunch of repair shops with just a loose part, and most would say, oh, loose part. And some others would say, oh, we got to keep it over the weekend, and they would charge us hundreds of dollars. And I would say, well, would you ever cheat people like that? Oh, no, we would never do that. And I would say, oh, yeah, well, watch this, and play the hidden camera recording. And it just was great television, and politicians loved it, and they called up and said, oh, we're going to solve this problem. We're going to create a Department of Consumer Affairs. And they did in Oregon based on my reporting. And young John Stossel loved it. Oh, these big politicians are paying attention to young me, and I'm doing all this good. But then I stayed on the beat. Unlike most reporters, I wasn't jumping on to the next thing, and we would do a similar kind of story the next year, and nothing changed. Same thing, most people were honest, a couple people ripped us off. So what was the Department of Consumer Affairs doing? We go there, and there's this dreary government building where people are licensing TV repairmen, car repairmen. And people instinctively like that. We license drivers, we license dogs, and we think it makes us safer. But in this case, all it did was raise costs, make things more difficult for an immigrant, say, who didn't speak good English, couldn't figure out what the instructions were. Some people had to pay more to hire a lawyer because the government forms are always so complicated. And it didn't accomplish squat. So I kept seeing this, and then I thought, okay, well, maybe if the government isn't doing anything, I'll go to the trial lawyers. You know, they can sue and really punish the bad guys and get money to compensate the victims. But the more I looked at that, the more it seemed like they were enriching themselves, and the victims still got screwed. So despite having gone to college, I hadn't learned much. I read more. I started to learn more about liberty, and what really woke me up was Reason magazine. I discovered that, and it was an epiphany. Oh my God, this really makes sense, and these people understand it better than I do. And that started me on this crusade where I'm a born-again free marketeer trying to convince people.
So Was there anything in your childhood or adolescence that might have inclined you toward liberty and free markets?
My parents were immigrants. They voted sometimes Democrat, sometimes Republican. I wasn't very interested in politics. As I said, I certainly wasn't interested in journalism or doing any of that. It's weird. It's like some of us have something in our brains that makes us get this. And once I understood it, I thought, wow, this is great. I'm in a position here at 2020 at ABC to explain this to people. And when I explain it, they'll get it. And people will stop growing government. And people will see what makes countries prosperous and tell the Hong Kong story. And there'll be a movement. My own wife, she'll say, oh yeah, okay, I can see your point. But then she'll pick up the New York Times the next day and says, well, what about this? Poor people are getting screwed because there isn't a law. Some people can't get their brains around the unintended benefits that happen when people are free.
That might be so, but what characteristics do you think we could look for in people that might suggest they're open to classical liberal ideas?
People who are analytical. And the result is sort of tough for me in the video business and tough for all of us trying to convince people. It's disproportionately smart, nerdy guys. And I wish there were more minority women who believe this stuff, because I think people would listen harder to minorities and women. And women talk better than most guys.
Was there anyone in your life, either someone you knew personally or someone whose work you admired, who really inspired you?
Well, my mother, who said, work hard or you'll freeze in the dark or starve in the cold. And that's what led me to, in the job in the Portland, Oregon TV newsroom, where I knew nothing about writing for an anchor, to just work really hard and try to do the story in a way that would be most clear to people. The kids who'd taken journalism courses were less open or less desperate and less open to trying new things. Because I didn't learn easily, I wanted a picture for almost every sentence that would help explain what the sentence was saying. And I tried harder to get pictures or sounds or music or something to tell the story. And that helped, I think, make me succeed.
And what differences do you see between today's journalism and the journalism you grew up working in?
We were so important and self-important then because we reached a lot of people. People didn't have choices. There were basically 3 channels: ABC, NBC, CBS, then maybe an independent station in many markets, and then the PBS station, which nobody watched. So, like, I had just a big audience, and I was very self-important and could go down the street and I would always be recognized. And then I got a job offer in New York City at WCBS, the big New York operation, where I thought, okay, now I'm going to see what good journalism, what varsity journalism really is. But they were shallower than we were at KGW TV in Portland, Oregon. They covered what happened that day and threw stuff on the air. Then I went to ABC and thought, well, here, 2020, they'll be really careful and really do good research. But they were just as shallow there too. But we got a huge audience. Geraldo got 30 million people. My most was 17 million people. And what's changed now, of course, is that we have choice. We would have had it sooner, except, again, government causing the problem. Government banned cable channels many places, saying, oh, poor people can't afford cable, so we have to hold this back so they're not disadvantaged. But once cable happened, then the 2020 audience shrank because people who wanted discussion of news would go to Fox or MS. Did that exist then? Fox or CNN, anyway. And now we have a million choices, and now people put stuff out that's hard to believe and sometimes shouldn't be believed. But hey, I'm a libertarian. I think choice is good.
What's it like to be recognized? Do people stop you on the street to chat?
It's mostly nice. I mean, it peaked when I was on 2020 and people only had 5 channels. Then I was a serious celebrity. But it's nice to have people come up and say, sometimes, hey, aren't you what's his name? Or more pleasant, you're Stossel, I really like what you do. Or I'm a libertarian. Or you turned me on to Thomas Sowell. Or, by and large, being a celebrity is annoying sometimes, but mostly nice.
What's the most fun or the most interesting story you ever got to cover?
I know this isn't really fun, but here I am, a consumer reporter at 2020, ABC. And now I'm discovered Reason Magazine and Libertarian Ideas, and yet every day they come to me with a new scare story. What's going to, this is killing people. Bic lighters are exploding in people's pockets, setting them on fire. They've killed 4 people over the past 4 years. But I, by then, had a list on my wall of what killed people in America because I was getting sick of these stories. And I could say, well, okay, I'll cover Bic lighters if we cover plastic bags first, because they kill not 4, but 200 people every 4 years. Or buckets, 5-gallon buckets. Toddlers fall into them and drown. They kill dozens of people every 4 years. Those are bigger scares. And they looked at me like I was crazy, called me callous, and they assigned the story to Bob Brown. And I kept refusing the scare stories and trying to point out that, like, when you say pesticides cause cancer, first of all, they probably don't. There's no cancer epidemic, although they think there is. But also, by making farming easier and food cheaper, they save lives because wealthier is healthier. Our reporting in many cases is a disservice if we scare people about innovation. And what really gave me the courage to do this was this book, Searching for Safety, which really explained this. And I could go up against ABC management, and right about that time they gave me specials, hour-long specials, and this, I insisted, was going to be the first one. 2 producers quit, saying, you're saying regulation itself kills people? That's not journalism. That's conservative dogma. And to my surprise, ABC executives said, well, we don't really agree with you, but it's an argument that deserves to be heard. And they ran this show. We called it, Are We Scaring You to Death? I wanted to call it, We Are Scaring You to Death, but they wouldn't let me. And it got good ratings. And that then changed my career. And they, in my next contract, agreed to give me several primetime specials a year where I could argue these libertarian points.
One of my favorite videos of yours and one of your most watched was with Edward Snowden. What was he like?
He's smart and persuasive. And a lot of people go in with preconceived agenda and they hear him and brings their mind around. Also, you start listening and you don't tune out like you think you will because he's interesting and our conversation was interesting. So started, maybe I'll do my usual 5-minute video, which is based on a 20-minute interview maybe, or a half hour. And we ended up talking for almost 2 hours because he's just really smart and made good points. And I've spent my whole career cutting things down because I have a short attention span, and I assume most people do. But this long, more than an hour interview is one of my most watched also, so.
Another story that's earned you some notoriety was your recent lawsuit of Facebook and its subsequent dismissal in court. Did that shed any light for you on social media or just the age we're living in?
It shed a little. I had done a video about climate change with some scientists, climate scientists from that had been assembled by the Heartland Institute, another libertarian think tank, and their argument was that, yes, the climate is changing, always has, always will, and probably man is warming things up. But it's not this crisis that it's being portrayed at. Holland adjusted to higher water years ago, and it was much harder to build dikes, and we can adjust now, but it's crazy to kill our economy with this panic that's going on. And the video, 6 minutes, I think, got something like 30 million views, no, 24 million views on Facebook. That was my Facebook record, and I'd been getting millions of views on Facebook. But Facebook aligned with this lefty journalism group called the Poynter Institute, which doesn't do anything useful. And they approved certain so-called fact checkers. And a group called Science Feedback got the contract with Facebook to censor science that they considered wrong. And they labeled this, I forget what their exact label was, but the result of the label is where I was getting 30 million, suddenly I was getting thousands. It turned out, as we reported on it, they didn't even watch the video before they said it was misleading. Just the fact that in one of my videos I'd interviewed Michael Schellenberger, who they considered sketchy. And Michael Schellenberger simply said that the wildfires in California were more government caused because they didn't pick up the debris rather than climate change. And that's true. But they want everybody scared. They want lots of money spent on pretending to do something for climate change. And they didn't like that I got 30 million views saying we can deal with this. So they applied their censorship label. Now, as I said, it's a private company. They can do what they want. But I didn't think they should be able to lie about things. I think condemning me without watching it was kind of a lie, and clearly a lie was in their review, they put in quotes from me some stuff I didn't say. And in my career, if you put something in quotes somebody didn't say, you get fired for that. And I asked Facebook to correct that. They didn't. They don't even reply. And there was one other thing, which I'm now forgetting, that they did that I thought, that's defamation. They shouldn't do that to people. So I sued, and Facebook's lawyers said, well, our fact check, it's not about facts. That's just an opinion. And the judge accepted that argument, and opinions should be free. And so I lost on the first round. And then I just didn't like being in the business of suing. Such an ugly, expensive thing, and I didn't think I was going to win eventually, but it cost a fortune. So at that point, I dropped it.
And for those who didn't get a chance to see the video before Facebook's fact check, where do you land on climate change, and especially panic over climate change?
Well, it's already killing people because money that could go to useful scientific research and medical research is going to pointless activities and boondoggles for Al Gore's friends. But when this first came out, I admit, having covered so many, this is going to kill you scares. Nitrates in bacon and cell phones are giving people brain cancer. And the New Yorker won a Pulitzer Prize for its article on how power lines cause cancer. They don't. One scare after the other, which turns out to be nonsense. Flesh-eating bacteria. All the planes are going to crash in the year 2000 because the computers won't make this adjustment. And then when Michael Mann and others said the climate's going to destroy life, I thought this is another utter bullshit. But over time, I became convinced that yes, the Clearly, climate changes. That's always happened. We can adjust to that. Is man playing a part? Okay, at first I was skeptical. Now, a lot of smart people say, yes, most certainly man is playing a part. But then the two big points, which most people don't pay attention to, is it going to do terrible damage? Possibly, but probably not. And as I say, we can adjust to it. And fourth, the biggest scam, is anything we're doing now and spending a fortune on going to make any difference? No. We don't have the technology. And all this stuff we're doing, even the Obama administration admitted the Paris Accord would, if everybody obeyed it, and everybody isn't, would make only a fraction of a degree difference. And far smarter to just let technology develop and let people get rich, and then maybe down the road somebody will invent a carbon suck machine or something that will alter the path of global warming, or just spend the money adjusting to it. But what we're doing now costs a fortune and won't help.
What are some other stories that you think will shape the next decade or two?
Number one is the debt. That it's crazy what we're doing. Social Security and Medicare are just unsustainable. Social Security was created at a time when most Americans didn't live to age 65. Now, people like me, rudely, don't want to die. And I like getting those benefits that you're giving me. And it's totally screwed up the medical system in that I go to the doctor, I'm on Medicare. Nobody even talks about price. Nobody asks a question. Yeah, maybe you should get an MRI. I go, I don't pay a penny for a lot of it. Sometimes I'll get a mailing from the government. You got all this treatment, cost $20,000. Your share of the bill is $16.40. So the normal price mechanisms just aren't working. Even if they were, it's still unsustainable because we keep living longer. And at some point, people who are desperately poor and need government help for retirement or health care, the money just isn't going to be there. Or more likely it'll be there, but they'll just print more to pay the doctors, pay for what they've promised, and you'll give your doctor $100 for the appointment, and he can use it to buy a loaf of bread because inflation will be rampant. Something's going to give, and I've been doing stories about this for 20 years, and so maybe you can say I've lost credibility because I thought it would happen long before this, but the animal spirits of our economy have kept us going, and inventing things like cell phones make things so much more efficient that the economy is kept up with our bloated government so far. But as my age group keeps growing, it's going to pop, and that's going to be a really big crisis.
And what are your thoughts about the recent bout of inflation?
That was 8%. This will be 20% and 100%, and stuff like Argentina or the Weimar Republic, where people were carrying wheelbarrows full of cash. It will be a horrible crisis. Rich people will squirrel away some gold or Bitcoin and we'll do okay. But a lot of Americans will suffer terribly.
So it sounds like you're pessimistic, at least about the future of Social Security and Medicare. What about the future in general? Are you optimistic or pessimistic, and why?
Sort of both, in that I'm a natural pessimist. I always see the problem. But I've been seeing the problems for years of reporting, and by and large, things get better. The guys at Cato doing human progress chart this pretty well, that human ingenuity makes life better. So I've become more optimistic over time.
Okay, now I want to throw out some rapid fire prompts, and I want you to answer in as few words as possible. Advice for aspiring journalists.
Just do it.
The current state of journalism is?
Good, because we have more choice.
The current state of politics in America.
It's always sucked. Self-important people trying to promote themselves.
The craziest story no one is talking about right now.
If it's really crazy, people will be talking about it.
The most important story of the next 10 years will be
entitlements and how you take care of us old people.
Most meaningful interaction with a politician you ever had.
I would say it was with Bruce Babbitt, the Interior Secretary. When I was at ABC, we were doing a story on how they weren't clearing the forests were burning, they were mismanaging things. He sat down, took a look at me, and said, "I'm going to fire whoever scheduled this interview." And then he walked off. He didn't want to talk to a government critic.
And what did that teach you?
Showed me how suck-up most reporters are with cabinet secretaries.
Best hope for the liberty movement moving forward.
Students for Liberty.
Story outside of the U.S. you're most passionate about.
When the Soviet Union fell, I thought the world would say, "Oh, God, now we see we were wrong. It doesn't work. Free markets work. Look at Hong Kong, went from third world to first world in 50 years. You just need private property, title to your land, and economic freedom, and there'll be prosperity." And yet, around the world, you see crazy things. I was interested in Chile recently. They privatized their Social Security system. Great. It wouldn't bust like America. But it's so hard to get people to understand the benefits of these things. They rebelled against it and almost threw it out. Venezuela was relatively successful. They bring in this crazy socialist and destroy the whole country. You see it in Europe now. I mean, even the former Soviet bloc countries, some of them seem to adopt free markets and then start to prosper. And then a new group of politicians comes in and they say the businesses are taking too much, their commissions are too high, and they throw it all out.
Okay, liberty-minded politician you're hopeful about.
I don't put my faith in politicians.
What about Justin Amash?
I like him. I like Justin Amash. I mean, he's hardly, he's no excitement who's going to bring people to life like we need in a politician. But I think his ideas are right on.
And Ron Paul?
Yeah, he's the best. He really started the movement and took shit from everybody, from Congress, from his fellow co-workers for so long. And he built a movement. And I used him in my videos many times. I had trouble using him because he never ends a sentence. And I would have to try to get him to end a sentence, to cut it down. And then when his son came along, I thought, this is going to be great. He's going to convince all Americans. But he wasn't as hardcore libertarian, and he hasn't convinced America to become libertarian either. But God bless both of them. They do important work.
Joe Biden.
Yeah. It's like he's just a hack. He's just, I don't know what he believes. He just does what the progressives around him tell him. And when they say, oh, this is going to provide good things for everybody, he's not smart enough to understand the damage it will do. I remember years ago when I first used a good soundbite from him on 2020. He was pushing mass trains as mass transit. It's trains, trains, trains. It's the most lively I ever saw him. And yet that's horrible for mass transit because the trains only go in one direction. And most cities don't have enough people to carry that. And they see the failure, but don't they learn? No, they don't want to learn. They just want to believe that their vision will work.
And Donald Trump?
I mean, he certainly, I wish Justin Amash could talk as well as Trump does. I mean, he's just a selfish, bully. And I hate him for that, and his crassness and his self-importance. On the other hand, he picked some good people during his administration who probably postponed the bankruptcy of welfare and Social Security for a couple years by cutting a few things.
What's going to happen in the 2024 elections?
I don't pretend to know anything. I trust the people who bet. And at my website, Election Betting Odds, people who put their money where their mouth is just have a better track record than polls and pundits.
Why aren't prediction markets more widespread? It seems like a potential wealth of information.
Before it got to be out of favor, the Defense Department wanted to use prediction markets to try to predict where or when the next terrorist incident would happen. And Ron Wyden and some other senators said, "Oh, that's terrible, that's immoral, you can't let people bet on terrorism." And so we lost a possible predictor.
What's something no one knows about you and wouldn't be able to guess?
The best sport in the world is beach volleyball.
And why is that your favorite sport?
Because I play it and I like it. And even at my old age, sand is soft, so I'm able to still play.
Well, John, it's been a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you for your time. Is there anything I didn't ask that you were hoping I would?
Probably, but I can't think of it right now. I think you covered a lot. If you want to come work for me, we're going to have spots in the future. And just write us at john@johnstossel.com.
So that was our interview with the man himself. Hope you enjoyed it. And make sure to subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified of our next feature interview with the Libertarian governor who won more than 60% of the vote in his state.